Like, what makes a business actually sellable?
Let me start from the basics, right? So firstly, have I sold businesses personally? Yes. I've had some exits, I've had some business sales. Have I helped clients do that? Yes, many times. To give you the first part of the answer, what makes a business sellable? Someone wanting to buy it when you're ready to sell it. I mean, that is the most basic fundamental premise. What you're really talking about is, how do you increase the odds of selling when you want to sell and having someone ready to buy it?
Who are the buyers?
So
Welcome back to the Winner's Playbook. Billy here with a special guest, business coach and mentor, Baz Gardner. Today we're talking to owners who want a clean exit and a proper retirement payday, not a handover that drags on for years. We'll cover what buyers actually pay for, how to reduce key person risk, how to show reliable profit, and what to fix now so you're deal ready when the timing is right. If you're planning to cash out in the next few years, this one will save you a lot of pain. Baz, great to have you on.
Billy, always a pleasure, mate. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. And just for the listeners, we've worked together for a couple of years, and I consider you a great friend of mine. And
Thank you.
Personally, I've got a huge amount of value from your coaching, as has obviously the business here at Linkwell. So very happy to have a chat to you on the podcast today.
Well, mate, very happy to pay the love forward as well, and the feeling's mutual, mate. It's been an absolute pleasure working with you for the last, I was trying to work it out, it's nearly 3 years, so it's awesome.
I think it's about 3 years, and hopefully for a while to come.
Mate, absolutely. Well, friendships are built to last, so we've definitely done that, mate.
Awesome. And I just thought, before we get into this topic, for the listeners out there, you live out on a massive property in the middle of nowhere, which I was fortunate enough to be able to come and visit you a year or so ago. So you're up in sort of remote northern New South Wales.
Yeah.
And I always like to check in, like, what's the latest projects or what's happening on that property at the moment?
Well, just for the listeners and viewers, so, owned a bunch of businesses over the years, mostly in and around different advisory, style of business, professional services. Kind of scaled that back, mostly just do individual work with business owners now. So got the smallest team I've had in 30 years. But I treat my clients' teams as my team. So that's kind of worked nicely. And because I'm able to do that, we decided, the kids are growing up, we're going to move to the farm. So that's just a little bit of background. And it's interesting because you say in the middle of nowhere and it's remote. Is anywhere really remote? Well, yeah, it takes 40 minutes to get to the nearest city, 30 minutes to get to the nearest IGA. So it's a little bit of a different lifestyle choice. And yeah, we like the space, we like the open air. We like the animals, we like the country. So really enjoying it. Still traveling a lot, to different places, back to see the kids in Brisbane, overseas to clients, all of that kind of stuff. So current projects, well, solar, new solar system, because we're completely off grid. We're experiencing a bit of a heat wave at the moment, which is what we were just talking about. I just don't want any energy limitations. So I'm going to install a huge solar system.
Nice.
That's what's coming next.
Nice. So yeah, just before we started recording, you were just showing me it was sitting at 39 degrees in the house the other night. So that's probably when you went, stuff this, time to get a massive system on the roof.
Yeah, so 39.5 degrees in the living room at 7 p.m. at night. Now we do have some aircon, but it's only limited to a certain portion of the house. And at the moment we need to run a generator for the aircon. So that's the next step, mate. Other than that, probably next thing will be a whole bunch of new sheds are going in, new turf, some new fencing again. We've just did a whole round of new fencing. So it's a different style, enjoying the farm projects as well. So water retention, pasture improvement. They're some of the broader objectives. So there you go, mate.
Yeah, and there's been a few interesting ideas. Like I know when I was out there, like it's quite a big property. And I said, Baz, couldn't you just stick an airfield in here? Or so is that on the cards or not? Maybe.
I've got a mate of mine who's also another client, and he flies small airplanes, and he's like, it's, you know what, you've already, like, this field is already good enough to be an airfield. Yeah, look, I'm not the hugest fan of super small planes. I don't mind them. Happy for other people to fly in, but probably not, mate. there's an airport 30 minutes away, so you know that'll get me to one of the capital cities in a couple of hours. So
fair enough. All right. Well, let's get into it. So
no problem.
We're talking about business owners who are looking to exit or get that big payday. So what makes a business actually sellable? Like how do you get it to that point?
Well, let me start from the basics, right? So I want to be realistic about all of these things. And just for whoever's tuning in, I like to answer questions by taking people on a journey. So firstly, have I sold businesses personally? Yes. You know, I've had some exits. I've had some business sales. Have I helped clients do that? Yes, many times. So I've been through a lot of experiences. To give you the first part of the answer, what makes a business sellable? Someone wanting to buy it when you're ready to sell it. I mean, that is the most basic fundamental premise. So what you're really talking about is how do you increase the odds of selling when you want to sell and having someone ready to buy it. And I say that because nothing is certain, right? Nothing's certain in how you go about doing anything in business. It's all about making strategic choices and increasing your probability. You know, I've had businesses that I thought would probably nowhere near ready for sale, and the right person turned up, the right interests were aligned, and you know the business owner just miraculously has received 7 or 8 times what the business was probably worth. So it does happen. By the same token, you can put all of the best laid plans in place and it might take you years to sell it. So remember, it's about probability at the fundamentals. It's about having something that someone else wants and getting the timing right. And it's the timing that's an important part. And I think it's going to factor into our questions. But to get a little more specific, what makes a business sellable? Well, there's a whole lot of equations that can affect the probability of a buyer wanting to pay for it. But I'm also going to say that there's psychology in all of this mix. And probably the number one reason why most businesses never sell is more about the psychology of the business owner. So they are not reasonable with themselves. They hang on too long. They don't put a plan in place. They go for too long. They overcapitalize. Maybe they can't let go of the ego attachment in the business itself. So what makes a business sellable? Well, the first thing that I would say makes a business sellable is who owns it and what's their headspace, and have they put plans in place, and are they realistic with themselves, and have they developed themselves to be able to let go of the business they've created in the right way. So I know that's not a non-traditional answer, and I'll get to the more common answers to this. What makes it saleable? Well, consistency of cash flow. But even that on its own may not be what a buyer's looking for. So it's all about what the other person is likely to want. So, and in most cases, it's is it a standalone sale? So you're selling the business to someone who doesn't own the business. That's not the majority of business sales, unless it's to a key person within the business. So are you selling it to someone within the business? Are you selling it to multiple people within the business? Obviously, they will have different interests to a trade sale. So a trade sale might be you're selling it to a competitor, or it might be you're selling it to an aligned business that wants to enter your field of enterprise. And so what they're looking for is not necessarily in their mind what the valuation is or what makes it saleable. It's what your business is going to do for their business. So partly you need to understand who are you likely to sell it to and what are they going to want. And each of those potential purchasers are going to want different things. And those different things are what makes it saleable to them. Does that make sense?
So you're sort of saying in the first instance, it's a psychology, and you're saying that it's quite common for someone to think that they want to sell or know that they have to retire at some point, or I don't want to do this anymore, but they haven't actually come to grips with the reality. So
I see
step one is the psychology is, yes, you are actually ready to sell and you understand what that means. Is that what you're saying? That's like
I'll paint you a couple of examples. I think it's important for people, as business owners, understanding this stuff, because at the end of the day, this is how I help, businesses perform significantly better, not because I can't turn up and give them strategies. It's because we sit down and figure out, well, what's the headspace and what's the psychology and how does that fit in with the strategy? No different, from when we started working together ourselves. So an example of that is someone who is addicted to either being busy, the work. We've worked on some mutual clients together, right? You're too busy being busy to stop being busy, to put the things in place that will actually give you what you say you want, because you're not ready to do any of those things. You're not ready to confront the letting go. And in those cases, you can have people literally hold on to a business and work until health fails.
Yes.
And they go beyond health failing, and then things start to fall apart and the business becomes unsaleable, relationships fray, and it might not ever be sold as a consequence, or certainly sold for significantly less. Or then you're having, a business which has been really dependent on a business owner, and then they lose capacity and health. And then you've got relatives trying to come in to a business which isn't functional without that person. And you're talking, fire sale value or being worth nothing. And I've seen that happen many, many times. It could be that the business owner's ego and idea of self-worth is attached to the business itself, and they haven't learned to transition that. And so they think they're ready to retire, but they end up sabotaging all of the deals on the table. They're not realistic about it. And they say it wasn't enough, or the deal fell through, or whatever, but in reality, they are self-sabotaging the outcome. And I've seen that happen many, many times. Attempt to sell for, a decade and have 10, great deals on the table, but they get sabotaged. So yeah, psychology plays into it, as I said, in a big way. As a business owner, you need to have your head straight about what the business is to you, why you're in it, what the purpose is, and when is the time to let go, and actually making sure you've got a plan for that. So another thing that makes a business sellable, which leads on from what we're just talking about, is how dependent is that business on the business owner. So if you buy it, but then that person is doing the job of 5 people that you can't replace, well, you've got a huge risk, and all of a sudden the business that you thought you were buying might not actually produce. So I would say, other than those things, the number one thing that makes a business sellable is its dependence on the owner.
Okay, so it's psychology, and then the other part of your answer was about, well, who are the buyers? Because who you're wanting to sell to will then drive how you prepare for that.
Yeah, most definitely. However, I will say, right, pretty much every buyer wants to buy a business which is not going to be dependent on the person who they are buying out of the business. And this is why psychology is number one, because if your ego is caught up in this and you haven't planned for this, it means that you are too attached to the business, which means you have less buyers willing to pay less. And that is a consistent theme across almost all buyers. Okay. And then you see business owners get in the way. It's like, well, I'll hang around for 2 or 3, 5 years or whatever. And in very few circumstances does that actually work, because it's just a way to delay the psychology of understanding the separation of ego from self and business. And that's what blows it up.
And presumably, I mean, if and from the buyer's perspective, if they're buying a business, they need to uplift the value after they buy it. Like, they need an ROI. So they're going to want to change. They're going to want to implement quite a bit of change, typically.
Well, it depends on who's buying it and what they want. So it's not necessarily the case. If you've built a super profitable business, you're running on very high EBIT margins, it's very efficient. Well, maybe the return on investment is simply that they're buying a cash flow business. So that's not necessarily the case. It depends on what you've created with it. Or it could be someone who runs a more efficient business than you, and the reason they're willing to pay you more for it is because they know they can implement their systems to make it a hell of a lot more efficient. So it depends on perspective, and that's what I mean by, it depends on who you're going to sell it to and for what purpose and at what stage of the business. That being said, almost everyone is going to want you to be able to be if you're the business owner, is going to want you to be able to be disconnected from the business. Otherwise, you're buying human risk. And very few business owners want that. Certainly, if I'm advising them, they don't.
Okay. And so how should, let's say someone's looking at exit and they've gotten their head around some of the psychology. How do they then start to reduce that key person risk ahead of a potential sale?
Yeah. Well, great question. And you can see why it all stems from my first answer, right? Because if you haven't got your headspace right around it, then you are going to sabotage the process of maximizing the value of your business. Because maximizing the value of your business means looking at yourself objectively and removing its dependence upon you. And if your ego is attached to the business being dependent on you, then you're in this circle, right? So the first way to do that is obviously to confront this reality and to put business into perspective for yourself. Separate your self-worth from the dependence on you. So number one, once you've done that, then obviously you can start building a plan to put into place, right? How do you really have a business if you can't go away and it continue to be profitable? Okay. So to what degree that will work is a pretty good indicator of how ready it is for you to be able to sell it. Okay. Now, that may not be the case. You might have a key person in the business that is pretty much running it anyway. You've started to slow down and step back. Well, maybe they're looking at it and saying, well, I know that if at the moment, if you left, it wouldn't function well, but that's because you're still making decisions. But if you leave and I buy it, I know what I can do with it. So again, it's going to depend on who it is. But essentially, it's really going to be a case of you saying, how do I make this business independent from me?
Okay. And what are some of the steps involved in that? It was really case dependent, I guess, but are there any key things you see that?
Well, number one is your team, right? Is your team. So, and again, I know I'm going to come back to psychology. It's always psychology. There's no such thing as business problems. It's just people problems.
Yeah.
Right. So the owner's headspace, number one. And number two is then the headspace of the people that work in your business. You know, unless it is all systematized, online, process driven, that's a different equation. But for most businesses, there's still a huge people component. Right. And I know we're operating in the age of AI, but it's kind of funny that that hasn't proved to have changed the equation of you still need team members. So really, it's about empowering your team members. How do you grow them? Where are their self-worth? What are their self-worth attached to? How do you get them to a position to take more responsibility, lead better, run the business? And if you don't have the right mix or the right resources or the right people, then you need to find them. And then you need to figure out how to fund them and integrate them into that team. So building awesome teams is number 2. You build an awesome team, your business functions better. The better people you have, the better they function together, the less relevant you are. And that is absolutely, in my book, the measure of achievement as a business owner. But it's the opposite of the headspace of a lot of people.
Okay, so essentially, if you're that person looking to exit, you need awesome teams and teams that the whole thing just functions without you being there.
Yeah. Now, do you need to do it so that you are completely redundant while you're still in the business? No, not necessarily. But you have to be realistic about what your value is and what you bring to the table. So it could be that your goal is, well, yeah, I've made the business super profitable. I've empowered the team. Now my plan isn't to sell today. It's to step back, to move more into a chairman position. Well, that can work, but not if your ego is still attached, because then you'll get in the way, you'll override your people. All right. So that's why psychology of the business owner is number 1. Okay. So yeah, you can have a business owner continue beyond that point, and you don't have to make yourself completely redundant. You just need to be able to show to a new purchaser that there is a pretty easy solution for you not being there. And the more dependent it is on you, the less likely you are going to be to sell it.
Okay. What have you seen, like, when does it work best if there is that sort of key person and they're looking at because often that the seller will, like, they'll stay on in some capacity for a period of time.
Yep.
When does that work best? Is it like a 12-month thing? Because you said the buyer usually doesn't want that key person who's exiting to hang around.
It's again, some of these questions are multivariant, right? So it's going to depend on circumstance. And I'm just trying to paint some generalizations, having done this hundreds of times, right, for people. So again, it's going to depend on the person. And I'll give you an example. So, in my earlier life, I ran a financial planning business, much like you do, right? So I bought out 5 different businesses over the course of time before I eventually sold that business. And what I was looking for and what was appropriate was dependent on the personality of each of those business owners. But as a general rule, I wanted them to be prepared to let go. Because if they were going to hang around and, interrupt the relationship with the clients that, were part of the business that we were buying, if they were going to try to stamp their view of changes, if they were going to resist the way that we knew worked better, because in most of those cases, the reason it was so valuable for us to do so is because I bought businesses and then we introduced far better systems. So better systems, better value articulation, better processes. So we're able to double, triple, quadruple the value of that business. Okay. So is that going to work if you've got the business owner hanging around for years resisting that process? Probably not. However, out of those 5 businesses, 3 were too attached to the business. So I made sure the deal worked, that they were out reasonably quickly. 2 of the business owners I knew had the right headspace and were good people, and they weren't going to get in my way, and having them connected to the business in a relationship sense was going to continue to be valuable. And it's funny because I'm still, I would say I'm still friendly with both of those people. We had a, good relationship. I included one of them on my advisory board for a significant period of time afterwards. And it's because their ego wasn't left attached to the business. So that made them valuable. Okay. So again, it's going to depend on people. What is the right answer in one circumstance isn't going to be the right answer in another. But as a general rule, because there's significant risk of your business owner hanging around, businesses are going to want them out. By the same token, that's going to depend. If you've got a private equity sale, well, you know what? Maybe they're looking to have the business owner hang around as long as possible because they want to extract the value through the profitability. And so they're looking for you to run it just in a different ownership position.
Okay. All right. So then the starting point is really getting psychology right if you're that person who's
Absolutely
considering an exit or a sale of some kind.
And as I said, knowing who you're going to sell it to, right? Or who you're most likely going to want to sell it to.
Okay. And from the buyer's perspective, they're looking to buy a business. What are some of the key things they would like to see aside from what we've spoken about with the key person? What are some other things that are attractive?
So I just might add to some of the things I've said, but also in answering this, it's not just the type of business, it's the scale as well. So, I'm answering this from a small business point of view, from $1 million up to $100 million. All right. So the answer is going to be different once you start getting to a different scale. Okay. So different, because there's going to be different buyers with different due diligence requirements, different corporate governance requirements, etc. Okay, so just want to qualify that. Have we done larger sales to listed companies and things like that? Yeah, I've been involved in some of those. So for the audience, I'm primarily talking about family businesses that you might sell, for a $5 million exit or a $30 million exit. Okay, so just want to clarify that. So then to answer your question, well, again, it's going to depend on who's buying it and what they're looking for. But what they want to see is, what's the risk? What's my reward versus my risk? So if we want to give it at that level, who's going to buy it? And you need to put yourself in the shoes of that buyer. What's the risk they perceive and what's the reward that you're presenting to them? So you want to demonstrate that you're reducing the risk whilst providing a significant reward. Now that could be through your current profitability or it could be through the upside. Okay, so you've got to break down what those things are. To work out how to maximize the sale of your business, you have to look at the combination of those things. So how am I going to reduce the risk? Well, what systems do you have? I mean, it's not really rocket science because the same things that make a business profitable for you as a business owner are also the things that make your business more attractive to a potential buyer. Okay, so it's why I love what I do, because I always look at it. The overarching strategy we're going to run is so we're going to run this like you are not going to sell it and you're going to maximize your return from the business. Mm-hmm. And we're also going to run it like you're going to sell it, in which case you need to maximize the return from the business. So it's the same things. And the beauty of approaching it that way is, if all of a sudden your business is actually giving you what you always wanted, it's less dependent on you, so you're working less. You've created a better team, so it's more profitable. You understand your margins, your pricing, your value articulation, your market. So you've managed all of that risk. You may decide to keep it instead of selling it, right? So doing the same things gives you a pretty similar outcome. It also gives you the independence, because a lot of the time what happens is people end up selling it because they have to. Really, my advice is, don't sell a business because you have to. Sell a business because it's good enough that you can keep it if you want it. That's the position you want to be in when you're selling. And the other thing about this is psychology plays a huge part in the negotiation process. If you're in a position where you need to sell, you're probably going to get less money.
Yes.
You're going to rush the decision. Your body language will be different. Your psychology will be different. The message that your prospective buyers will be different. If you're selling it because it's shit hot and you are happy to keep it, you'll probably get more money for it.
Yeah, well, I had another question. Like, how far out did you plan for this? And it sounds like, from what you're saying, you don't want to plan for it, have a specific time frame, or have to sell at a certain time.
Well, I'd answer it as different ways.
Yeah.
Right? To build a great business, to achieve everything that you set out to in the first place, you should plan to sell it and build a plan to sell it from the day you start it. Or, by the way, that might not be your objective. You know, as I've said, I've sold businesses. So now, as you know, what I do is I operate in a very niche coaching capacity consulting, right? So I treat my clients as I'm a business partner of theirs. They're my friends, and I help them with all of these issues. Can I teach other people to do what I do at this level? Probably not. And if I do, it's going to take a long time, because this is 30 years worth of obsession. So is what I'm doing now a business? Well, kind of, because I'm not employed by anyone. I have, numerous clients, but is it saleable? Not really. But I've already had that. So I didn't build this to be saleable. I built it to be a balance of how I enjoy my life and get paid for what I love doing. So again, it depends on what your objective is. Not all businesses, and using myself as an example, are ones that you're building to sell. By the same token, if it's a business that you want to scale beyond you, then you should be thinking about and planning for selling it from day one. That doesn't mean you're going to, but you should build it as if you are, because you'll have a better business no matter what.
Well, it all makes perfect sense. Okay, we've got culture. So this term is overused. How do you think about that? How important is it if you're approaching a saleable business?
Well, again, I'm just going to answer this fundamentally first, right? So fundamentally, what makes a business saleable? Having a good business. Like I want to be really clear. How do you have a saleable business? By having a great business.
Yeah.
One that doesn't have too much principal dependence or key person dependence, right? I'm talking about the business owner first, because I always think of businesses like the champagne glass fountain, right? If you don't have the glass in the top, where are you going to pour the champagne, right? And it flows throughout the business. That being said, you could have multiple champagne glass businesses within there. Is it principal? Is it key person dependent as well? So that is part of your risk management strategy. It's your people. So how do you run a great business? Well, by making sure that your team is high performing. Not just the business, right? Not just the systems and process, but the people. So how important is culture to have a high performing business, which ultimately determines how saleable your business is? Well, it's incredibly important. Like, it's everything. It's because the psychology makes up the value of the business. How well do your team work together? How well do they communicate? How well do they take personal responsibility? Does your team have delayed gratification? What are their key characteristic traits? What's their neural types? Is there a good balance of different neural types, different capabilities? Are they functioning well together? That is what makes up your culture. Is there a standard of belief, perspective, and principle that people are held accountable to? That's your operating system. That is your culture. So how important is that? Absolutely critical. That's why I have a waiting list of people to talk to, right? Why? Because what we do is we go in, how do we quadruple the value of a business? Well, we make all of those things happen, and value flows as a consequence of that. And if value is flowing, more people will want to buy it. It's really that simple. Now, I know you're going to lead into another question a little later on, because we had a quick chat beforehand, and that's about valuation. If it's okay, I might just kind of jump into a little bit of that now, because it flows from what I'm talking about.
Yeah, no, I was going to raise that next. Let's talk valuation.
Cool. Well, what are people going to pay for? What's it worth? Well, how valuable is the business? How much profit does it create? How much assets does it own? Or how much goodwill does it have? Or how saleable is a product? So the opportunity to develop it. I mean, that's what it comes down to. But in most cases, what people will pay for in most sales is either going to be a trade multiple or a multiple of EBIT, so earnings before interest and tax. Okay. And it depends on the industry, and, the trade and what the trade multiples are. Accounting firms, as you know, sell for a lower multiple than financial planning businesses. Medical practices sell at a lower multiple to financial planning businesses. Legal practices sell at a different multiple to accounting. So they will have a trade sale valuation. And generally speaking, size will partially play into whether a prospective buyer is going to buy on that multiple. Like what a business's sale in that marketplace. Rent rolls, rent books, property management companies, they all have a traditional range for which they sell for. But if you achieve significant scale where your profitability is far higher than those, what the average business is, then it's likely you will be able to attract a buyer on an EBIT multiple, because your EBIT's going to be higher than the trade sale value.
Is there an element of scarcity too? Like in some industries, if there's only X amount of businesses of a certain scale, can that then attract a higher multiple? Because there just aren't, if a buyer has X budget and there's only a couple of businesses out there that tick the boxes. Like,
yeah,
is it generally the case as the business is bigger, there's a bigger range of what that multiple might be?
Look, I would say the trade sale in most cases, and again, all industries have their idiosyncrasies of who the buyers are, what the options are, right? And so you might say, well, narrower business, supply is lower, so maybe you get a higher price, but the converse might be true, right? There's a larger number of providers, risk is higher, and there's a lower number of competitors in a position to be able to buy you. And that could be a risk, right? So if you're too big for your competitors and too small for, private equity or corporate trade sale, then you might be in a you might be in a no man's land, right? So that means that your price comes down to fit into one of those zones, or you have to take your business, up a notch to be able to get into a different category. It's all going to depend. But I would say typically they are the two mechanisms of valuation. Now, I want to be clear. There's a difference between hiring someone to give you a valuation and what your business is likely to sell for in the marketplace, right? And the reason for that is a valuer needs to sign their name on a piece of paper to give you a compliance document within a reasonable range of accuracy. And so they may not take into account a whole lot of actual variables in knowing how to get the best price for the business, right? So I just want to be clear. I'm less interested in the paper valuation and more interested in how you are actually going to get the valuation out of a prospective buyer. Okay, so to be clear on that. And in most cases, the buyer is going to be looking at profitability levels and integration levels. And the reason that industries have a multiple, like a classic, this is what it sells for, a multiple of income, the reason they have them is because they've become commoditized to enough of a degree that a prospective buyer knows if they buy that, plug it into what they're doing, they're going to be able to, extract a certain amount of value. But they are typically your ranges. So what's an EBIT? Well, an EBIT is a multiple of your profitability. So whether you're going to get paid, 2 times EBIT, 1 times EBIT, or 7 times EBIT as an example, and that would largely be the range for the kinds of businesses that we're speaking about, somewhere between, 1 and 7. Well, which one do you want? Do you want 1 times or do you want 7? So what's the difference? Well, largely opportunity and risk. So how consistent is this profit? How well organized is it? Can I plug it in? Is the risk of plugging that in high or low? The lower the risk, the more you're willing to pay for that revenue stream. So the more you systematize your business, the better you build your team, the better the corporate structure, the easier it is for someone to buy it, the more likely you are to get up in that, 7 times multiple. So how do you go above a 7 times multiple? Well, what's the PE of the stock market at the moment, Billy? It's been a while since I looked at those numbers, but you might have gone to an economic briefing more recently than me.
I think the US was up near very elevated levels, well above 20. Australia below.
Okay.
On Australia is 15 to 20 maybe.
Yeah, look, the last time I looked, it was running at the 16 PE or something like that, but that's a while.
Yeah.
So look, do a quick Google PE multiple of, and this is for the readers, not necessarily for us, because the answer doesn't really matter, right? So my point is that why is a listed entity transacting on 15 times their earnings when a small business is transacting, and I won't say it's a maximum, because there's going to be a range from 7 to 15. So how do you get above 7? Well, you have to get closer to being able to be a listed multiple or being purchased by someone that is. Okay, so if you've got a prospective buyer that's operating at a 25% EBIT model and your business is a natural plug-in for theirs, does it make sense for them to pay you 10 times EBIT? Yeah, because they just doubled they more than doubled 2.5 times, their share price valuation. Does that make sense? So typically that's why, as you get up in scale and knowing who you're selling to can also help determine what the valuation of the business is going to be. So you might be getting, 8, 9, 10 times EBIT models. And if you want to get closer to, listing models, well, what do you need to do? List. I mean, that's a pathway, but that has a lot of consequences as well, right? Because
It's also
completely different control structure. Same as taking private equity. Well, when private equity is likely to be a partial sale, but you start having different control mechanisms, different people to report to, different influence, different decision making. So what are the reasons you're in business? And how is your fulfillment and ego attached to those things? Being really clear on that is the only way for you to build a real strategy for whatever it is that you are looking to do.
Okay, and have you seen in the last few years in Australia much change in terms of valuations and level of activity? And I know in a lot of industries it's been pretty rough the last few years, but have you seen much change in those dynamics or not really?
Look, the principles that I'm telling you are pretty consistent, right? But then you're going to have industry cycles, right? So the individual industry cycle as well as your larger economic cycle. And I would say from an economic cycle, it's more about credit and capital availability than it is what the economy is doing, right? So if the economy is doing poorly, then credit is going to be less readily available. If credit is less readily available, capital is less readily available, what's going to happen to the price of businesses? Does it mean that the valuations disappear? Not necessarily. Depends on the business. Depends on the particular. So you might have an industry that's very lucrative, attracting private equity, even when capital cycles are down. So it's how those two are interplaying together. By the same token, you could have the economy doing incredibly well, but a particular business segment, private equity is not there, capital's not there, or there's increased risk, or it's usually a combination of the two. That's why the capital and private equity or buyers is not there. So it's a combination of that. Have I seen that change? Overall, not really. But does it change in industries at different points in time based on those things? Absolutely.
Okay, and if someone's really looking to exit or sell, who should be involved in that? Who belongs on an advisory panel? Who should they involve in that process, preparing for that?
I guess I'm going to answer this in two ways, right? So I'm going to come back to a fundamental principle that I'm trying to restate. The best way to build a saleable business is by building a great business. Let's be clear. That's pretty straightforward. So build the best business you can, which means if you sell it, it's because you don't have to, and it's because it's super valuable, right? So who's the best to be on your advisory board for building a great business? Now, when it comes time to actually sell, you've got like, so now it's on the market. Now you've got prospective buyers. You're entertaining a deal. Maybe the answer between those two things is potentially different. Okay. So maybe who's on the advisory board when you are building the business and making it awesome might need to change when you're actually selling. That doesn't mean you throw it out. Now, to be clear, do most family businesses have an advisory board? What do you reckon the answer to that is, Bill?
No.
Okay. So funnily enough, you're a genius and you are correct. Most family businesses don't necessarily have a cohesive advisory board. So who do they talk to? Who are they normally talking to about stuff? See if we can. Yeah, family. Yeah. Oh, I mean, obviously they're talking to. I mean, I kind of gave it away in the title, family business. Yeah, but a lot of the time you've got the patriarch, the matriarch, or whatever, who is taking most of the responsibility for this. And so whilst they include their family in it, they're the ones taking response. So who are typically their advisors?
Yeah, well, it's usually an accountant in there, isn't it?
Okay. So they're going to have an accountant because you're making money, you're building a business. So hopefully you've got to have some decent tax strategies in place. Now, accountants are people I've advised as well. So I've worked with plenty of accountants. What's some of the downsides of just your accounting advising you?
Well, it's not always their expertise, really. They're not impartial as well if they've worked with you for a long time.
Yeah, maybe they've got maybe they've got their own internal biases, right? So they have an attachment to having you as a client. So selling the business. Now, most accountants are not going to look at it that way, but there's still going to be internal biases. Not only that, would you say on the range of entrepreneurial to very conservative, right, in terms of risk taking, where do accountants usually sit?
Very conservative.
Okay, so does that mean that you will always be getting the best advice from your accountant? Well, it's not that the accountant's bad. It's that you shouldn't limit the scope of your advice, just like you don't build a great team by having the same personality type, right? That's not how you build the best team. So in other words, an advisory board, you can talk about from a general point of view, could be from having, some connected people, industry partners, clients. If I go back to, my financial planning business, I had a client, had an industry partner, I had my internal general manager, and I had my accountant. Okay, so that's a reasonable mix, depending on the compliance requirements or the relationships that you have. It might be, a lawyer, and if you can find a good one, then a business coach, a business advisor should be critical. Someone who is looking across all of those different parameters. Someone that's trying to sit in your shoes, however, and coordinate that. Again, you've got to find the right people, and it comes down to people. But you should have independent parties that you can take input from. The closer you get to listed, the more of a requirement that becomes, and then you may need to formalize that as a board of directors, a shareholders board, etc. Right? That being said, when it comes time to sell, you're probably going to want some input from people who have sold businesses before, who understand how to negotiate, who understand variables, who understand how to get in your headspace to help you answer the questions honestly so you make the right decisions.
Yeah, so it's probably worth adding, how common is it that a deal falls through and the amount of money and time and energy that has occurred before that deal falls through, right? So it would be very costly not getting the right advice and getting it right.
Yeah, look, absolutely, right, for a lot of reasons. But you know what is potentially just as costly or significantly more costly?
Saying yes to a deal when you should walk away.
Yeah. I think about you and your your business partners. Over the time that I've worked with you guys, you've been growing the business significantly. And one of my happiest moments is when your managing director, decided to walk away from the wrong deal. That was a really highlight moment for me, because the process was the right one. The egos were in the right place. The decision was the right one. The biases were managed well. So I guess really who should be on your advisory board? People that are going to help you think about this honestly, help you be accountable and have experience in what you're trying to accomplish. And where you find those people doesn't really matter. Just make sure you've got them.
Well, that might be a good place to end this, Baz. Do you have any final comments?
Yeah, just remember that at the risk of sounding like I'm giving you a big shout out, right? The one thing that I didn't mention here is making sure that you've got someone independent to also, when I say independent, I don't mean the technical definition. I mean someone who is going to give you advice around your finances in this decision. And this is what a lot of business owners do wrong. It's all tied up in the business. Yeah, you want to sell it. Yeah, you want to make it profitable. But what you don't want to do is have all your eggs in that basket. That is not what you want to do. So I can tell you who you certainly should have on your team. Yes, you need to have a great accountant. That's a given. But so is having a good financial advisor. That might not be what I do anymore, but I believe in it just as much. You need to be having that business and diversifying your risk. You need to be diversifying your assets, taking profits, building property, building your share portfolios, building your super, minimizing your tax, making sure your structures are in place. So you need to be doing that outside of the business. Do not rely on a big payday that your business is going to give, because that puts you in the position of, what did we say before? What's the position you don't want to be in? Having to sell or needing to get a specific price. That's not how you should plan your retirement from your business. It should be this is what sets my family up for generations, or this is the icing on the cake. So that's probably what I'd finish with. And if you haven't done that, what's your business actually accomplished?
Well, that's an excellent piece of advice. And yes, we see it all the time. Yeah, people put everything into their business and assume, wait for that payday, and then life's going to be great after that. And that is a massive risk. And it's not the best way.
And unfortunately,
business. And not to mention your family too. Like if you've got one person in the family who's in the business, you've got a partner, children, etc. Yes, you need to diversify away from that risk early on.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. So unfortunately, I've seen this many times, right? As I know you have. And I've seen people after they've lost their business or been forced to sell it. All right. Don't be in that position. And I want you to understand, as a business owner or someone who wants to be a business owner listening into this, that is actually what happens to the vast majority of family businesses. They don't ever sell, not for any price. So plan to sell, but don't bank on it. I mean, being successful in life is about being fulfilled, right? Being fulfilled, having a good expression of your value, understanding what your self-worth is, getting it in the right position, building great relationships, enjoying your life, but also being fulfilled. And the definition of success on top of that, in terms of monetary, is about risk and reward. One of the things I've decided for me, I don't need to make more dollars. I'm not trying to be, my ego is far more under control than it was, in my 30s. Do I know because I've practiced it how to do it? Yeah. Yeah. Can I build businesses? Can I sell them? Yeah. So why don't I do that at a whole other scale? Well, because it doesn't answer my equation of what success is. And this is part of what you also have to be realistic about. But don't put all your eggs in one basket. Plan, put money aside. And the last thing that I would say about this is the complexities of family, right? That's the bit we haven't brought up, but actually plays into all of this. Because what do a lot of family businesses do? Employ family members. Or they bring their family in thinking they're going to pass the business along. And unfortunately, because egos are tied up, conversations don't get had, expectations are not expressed explicitly, and they are also a core member of your team, because this is what happens often in family businesses, that becomes the limiting factor. It's like it's a part of their success, but also the biggest self-sabotage. So if you're running a business with your family, then you most definitely need to make sure that you're getting objective input, that you are setting expectations well, that you've been clear. Your family and how they operate doesn't sabotage the rest of your team. And that you also have a pathway for how you pass that along. Okay, because most family businesses also screw up the plan to pass it along, to kids, cousins, nephews, whatever it might be, right? Yeah, the succession plan. So who should be on your board for the succession plan? Well, again, someone who's going to ask you a lot of personal questions and that can help you confront the conversations that you need to have. The best way to make sure it happens is by having the difficult conversations and putting them in context. Very important. I think that's what makes the difference between an ultra successful family succession plan. But that doesn't work most of the time either.
Thank you, Baz. I think we'll wrap it up there. Really appreciate your time and a pleasure talking to you as always.
Yeah, mate, absolutely. I'm very happy to have passed on some of my experience. I mean, for me, that is the idea of my fulfillment. The School of Hard Knocks paid forward. So look forward to talking to you again.
Amazing. Thank you, Baz. And listeners, if you found this helpful, please follow the show, leave a quick review, and share it with a business owner who is thinking about an exit.
Awesome. Take care, everyone.
Thank you, Baz.
Disclaimer. The information contained in this podcast is general in nature and does not take into account your personal circumstances. Please head to the show notes if you wish to book in a free 15-minute call to discuss your personal situation.